people. Hey, hey. Hi. Firstly, sorry for the delay. We had a bit of technical issues trying to transfer from one thing to the other, so we are starting a bit later than intended, but we're still giving you the same quality content. So again, Naja here as the chair and creator of Hikata Staten Island, and below I have...
So Cheyenne Clardy, aka Lady Moon Lioness, the co-con chair.
And next on to my, is that my left? My left, well, it's actually my right, but it looks like my left on the camera. We
No
have...
idea.
Stephanie Loriano.
Hey. So we usually actually have two more members that were supposed to be a part of this, but they were unfortunately unable to attend due to personal reasons, which is okay. Take care of yourselves. You know, we appreciate that. So really, the POC and fantasy panel, we are going to be talking about literally POC and fantasy, magical girls, magical beasts, how we feel that people of color are portrayed or not portrayed when it comes down to fantasy, whether it's novels, books, movies, movie adaptations, different things like that. So before we get into it, we'll do quick introductions of like who we are, what we do in regards to fantasy. So again, Naja here, hello. I always say I'm like a undercover magical girl.
You're a unicorn. A baby
I get
unicorn.
exactly. I get called unicorn a lot of the times because apparently things that I do are just very magical. I love wearing flower crowns, as you guys can see. Love looking kind of like a magical princess that is to be rescued. You know, being really poofy and stuff like that, but also to just really getting involved and kind of like that creativity and whatnot. And also just doing a lot of fantasy photo shoots and stuff like that. So I will pass it off to actually Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I love magical girls. Sailor Moon is my role model. I love her so much. I don't dress up in fantasy as much as I'd like to, but I would love to have more opportunities to do that. I like partaking in Naja's magical photo shoots, and if I could, I would dress up as Sailor Moon every day if I could. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right, Cheyenne.
So for me, I often have this very like witch like Dark Lord kind of aesthetic. So kind of like the accessories, the different type of like I said, accessories. I am also a writer, so I tend to write some things, whether if it's poetry or even just like a graphic novel within the fantasy genre. I mean, also outside of the shoots, I just love like watching fantasy content.
Okay, cool. Nice, nice, nice. So now we will go to a first question, which is, what does the term fantasy mean to you? So I will have it where Cheyenne goes first, and I dub myself last.
So the fantasy term, it's otherworldly. So it's very different from, like other genres that we tend to see. Sometimes you can have like dark fantasy, which can kind of go along the lines of horror, depending on how it's executed. So you have like coming of age, like that good versus evil kind of themes that are going on. But it's something, like I said, it's otherworldly. It's something that does not necessarily exist and that's like tangible on Earth, basically. So I guess that's like the best way I would define, like fantasy to me.
Okay, nice. Steph?
I can relate. I feel like that's exactly how I would describe fantasy. Something that doesn't normally exist within the norms of reality, things we don't see day to day. I guess specifically for me, it can be like magical creatures, people with superpowers. Like Cheyenne mentioned, something that could be darker, maybe things like vampires or werewolves. Even there's like sci-fi fantasy, which can be like robots, but like robots that are not iPhones or Roombas, but like people as like multifunctioning robots that can do other things. So, or post-apocalyptic, like fantasy where the world is ending. So things like that.
Oh, I accidentally didn't realize I muted myself. Sorry. So for me, fantasy is kind of like a combination of things within the real world just given like a little extra pixie dust, so to speak. Like the concept of like different magical beasts, which are like sometimes derived from like dinosaurs or different like older types of animals that are been like extinct that are no longer around. So thinking of them being around now would be kind of like, whoa, is that a thing? Could that be possible? You know, or like the concept like talk about like you guys before, like kind of the futuristicness of like of a civilization or like post-apocalyptic or something that's been like over, you know, turned by nature. You know, that's something for me that also is kind of involved with fantasy. And also nature in of itself, I feel like is just made up of something fantastical because of the way trees and flowers and the sky and animals just interact with each other kind of in my mind a magically cohesive way. For me that's kind of also what fantasy means. Not necessarily all of like the young adult like fiction books. Like those two a lot of times fall into like certain components of fantasy, but I just feel like those are just kind of like a different genre of that. To which leads us on to the next question, which is, what is your favorite type of fantasy genre?
My favorite
You guys
type
can
of
answer that while I'm trying to get this up.
No worries. I'm thinking. I think for me, since we brought up Magical Girl, that's in the forefront of my brain. I really think that's my favorite. Something that's or even something that's dreamier, like fairy tales with like unicorns and fairies. Something reminiscent of like mermaids and things like that. So something like of the fantastical realm with like fairy lore and things like that. But also, again, I do like space, like odysseys and things like that. With because for me, I think of Sailor Moon as space oddities. I mean, space operas and things like that, and like Star Wars. So for me, those are my favorite.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Shy?
So for me, you know, growing up with Harry Potter was one thing that kind of like defined part of my childhood, but another one was Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits. So for me, Lord of the Rings, if you decide, if they have the books, they have the movies. I grew up watching the extended version of the Lord of the Rings movies, which are very, very long. So you kind of get to know the characters in depth, and just the world that Tolkien had created is aesthetically beautiful. Just like the different species, different, you know, type of beings and their way of life, just their overall appearance and just what their world looks like. They're like the elves have such a beautiful, like beautiful architecture, you know. And it kind of is just like you find yourself awestruck by just how like the minerals or like the herbs or things that they use as components that kind of makes it stand out in the fantasy genre. Then you have like the hobbits that are more like, you know, like you're on like this kind of like a prairie, like a plains, like you're basically like kind of part of nature, but nature is a big component that I've noticed in fantasy, which I'm drawn to, and two, that I absolutely adore.
Nice. So for me, even though I just said about the young the young adult fiction, I was that kid who was like when like the whole like you know, amazing races and like the different things like that. I'm like, oh wow, I like that. That's nice with all the vampires and the werewolves and all that stuff. I was like, yeah, that's my jam. Because I was like every other like prepubescent girl, roughly, you know, at that time that loved those different types of genres. But now, as I'm like older, I laugh at them a little bit just because of cheesiness. But also too, I'm more invested in fantasy that seems like comes from like different people's cultures that come from like their version of the lore when it comes down to like mermaids or griffins or different things like that. Like what do they call them in those languages? So for me, I would say like international. Like I don't know what the term would be, but kind of like a not like a stereotypical you know, genre of fantasy and stuff like that. Oh wait, I gotta pull this comment up. Okay, so they said I would love to see the Harlem version of Hogwarts. And you know,
Oh my god,
I
that
would
is
too.
crazy.
I would too for sure. We need. I think you're ready. We're throwing that into like the universe. Hopefully, it'll come back
That
to
would be
us.
like D&D. Like I could see this being like a D&D campaign or
Oh
something.
yeah, right. Hogwarts. It's Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
Harlem Hogwarts. H and
Yeah.
H.
Mm-hmm. Instead of D&D,
No,
H&H.
the H&H, and that's exactly what they would call it. I live in the H&H.
Yeah.
Anyway, but but even like what's happening right now, right? Creating like these different types of worlds is also part of fantasy as well. It isn't just the creatures or the characters, it's the little atmosphere. It's how people talk. If they're talking like a specific language, let's say, that is made up for this fantasy world. So kind of leading into talking about characters and places and different things like that. If you could be any magical creature, what would you be?
Thought about this a long time, so I feel comfortable enough to answer first. I would love to be some sort of aquatic creature, something like a mermaid. It's been a childhood dream of mine, honestly. Thank you for giving me the platform to tell everyone in the world that's exactly what I want to do. And maybe some cross with a magical girl, because I think, again, Sailor Moon is my role model, so it would be unfair not to give her an honorable mention.
I love that. I love that. Shy.
Uh, I was thinking a siren because you get to lure people to their death. That's one interesting thing about them. Yeah, you see where my priorities are. It's absolutely few elsewhere. A warlock, a dark lord. Like I kind of just I like things that are dark because there's much more you can do with something that's more gritty and just so much darker or stereotypically more like darker and morbid. Like you can do a lot with it. You can twist the stereotype and everything. But yeah, siren, warlock, dark lord, that would be something I would want to be.
I'm not surprised at all with any of the answers that have been given, both in a positive but not positive way. For me, first thing, mermaid all the way. Hilarious thing, can't swim.
It's
Don't
okay.
care. I would, if I had the opportunity to put on a realistic looking mermaid tail, I would dive into the ocean and drown proudly because I know I was a mermaid, but for a second. Because I would want to be one so bad. And then if I could not be a mermaid, if I was just not on the table and just mermaid was just taken up by too many people or something like that, I would be a fairy. I love the concept of having fairy wings, being able to fly, to go wherever I want to, but also just having like that magical sense to it. Plus, a fairy could be a dark fairy, frost fairy, earth fairy, all those different types of components. So for me, I feel like I would have a lot that I can do outside of just swimming. Not saying swimming ain't cool because I can't talk crap about it because I can't even do it myself. But if I'm a fairy, I feel like I have a lot of options of the type of fairy that I could be. And in my mind, there's a grand fairy. So therefore, I have the potential to become a grand fairy and just do really cool things. And everyone just asks me for my wisdom. But and oh, in fact, one of our people that's watching actually commented and said they would want to be a fairy. And so me and Toby were on the same page with having the magical wings. And it's to the point actually me wanting to be a fairy slash a mermaid. And Cheyenne knows this, that I've talked many times about combining the two together as one
Yeah.
as a original character which is a mermaid fairy. How would that work functionally? I don't know. However, it doesn't matter because it's fantasy, and half the time they do not think of the functional qualities of how that creature works. So
No.
I'm gonna just leave that one there. But to kind of get a little bit, we talked a little bit about stuff, we're a little bit silly, but to slightly get into a little bit more of a deeper, more serious part of today's panel, which is how do you think POC are portrayed in fantasy content? So like books, movies, and shows. Like, what are your guys' thoughts on how people of color, how people like us are portrayed in those different types of content? Shy.
So we're often POC coded. So often where you have inhuman like beings So like let's just say like Lord of the Rings, for example. I'm going to use that one because you see different races, different groups, but you don't really see someone that's a person of color. But you often connote that in a lot of, when you think about stereotypes, we're often as seen as other. So you have that sense of othering where you have characters that are, you can sense that they are people of color, but there's not much that's said to it to confirm or to deny it. So there's a lot of POC coding. Harry Potter is another example where you have like little sprinkles of characters that are people of color. So you have like Cho Chang, who was the only like, you know, East Asian character in there that was in Ravenclaw. You have two girls that were Indian, that were of Indian descent. And it was kind of like, is that it? You know, there's really, it's almost virtually invisible where there are people of color in fantasy.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I could read your lips now. Just
Yeah, we read your lips.
I agree. I don't think in terms of, so for me it always comes to question when I want to dress up as a character that I see, because I'm so enthralled by the look and I love anime and fantasy and all those things. You tend to want to find yourself so that you can believe that it exists and that you could portray it. And personally, I find that there's very, as a fine example of Lord of the Rings, like there's supposed to be these fantastical creatures that are, you know, just otherworldly beings, but why can't they all be different shades of like flesh tone colors, you know? They're not any fairies or elves, or like rather the elves, I didn't see any portrayed in light where I could dress up as one and be recognized perhaps as a character from that universe. And many times I feel like there aren't any other, like let's say mermaids, the ones like a creature we've discussed. I haven't seen any mermaids that I can really say from any sort of show, TV, movie that looks like me. That'd be really cool. I feel like that's an opportunity for someone to try to portray, like let's say mermaids could be from different regions of the world and look different, like to your point, Naja, like, you know, there's folklore and different regions of the world have these concepts, but they can be presented in a different way, and it would be really important probably to see the way that would be portrayed in different cultures, because then I'm sure other people would feel like they could also emulate those fantastical creatures. I personally don't feel like I see a lot of me in a lot of those genres. So I think for me, it's the easiest way to look at it is like, oh, when it comes down to Halloween, when I think about fairies and princesses and things like that, I don't see a plethora of examples that fit into things that would reflect me, you, or Naja. You being Cheyenne. There's three of us. Cheyenne, Naja, me, and everyone else. So that's the way I look at it.
No, you guys made like a lot of good points, right? Because like, as much as I have loved like different genres within fantasy and like I fall in love with like main characters and stuff like that, it really hasn't been until the last couple of years where there are characters who are people of color. There are characters specifically for me because I'm Black, I'll say, because specifically looking for Black characters where they aren't just like the funny best friend, or they're used for like that one thing, for that one, you know, episode, that one part of the movie, or they're just a person that winds up dying in the movie as part of like something that helps the main character, you know, build some type of courage, or, you know, blah 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 blah. Or they're not like the villainous part of the story, and it's not obviously where I would want, or maybe some of us also would want it to be, but I am slowly starting to see it become more and more. Plus, there are actually a lot of Black, you know, just POC period content creators who are in this area that we just have to show support for, right? That we have to recognize what the things that they're doing, even if it's not just people who are making books, movies, people who are making props, like for elf ears, right? For the longest time, we could not find elf ears that were in any of our skin tones, right? But there are people who make elf ears that are in our skin tones. There are people who make wings look like they would come from like our actual backs and stuff like that. You know, there are people who specifically put out content for that are fantasy because of the fact that we are not getting it in these mainstream areas, and we just have to support those who are doing things like that. And pulling up actually the next thing, another question, right? Because we talked a little bit about like what representation and this and the third. So like, what does representation mean to you guys? And I actually start this one off. For me, representation isn't just throwing in a side character, throwing in someone, or always having us to be the villain, but representation means that this character who is a person of color has a full body story. They aren't just there to just support or just be a reason that the main character is now stronger or has a reason to fight for something or different things like that. Like, they actually have importance to the story, and that they're not POC vicariously, right? What was the term that you used, Cheyenne?
Like coding, PC coding.
Thank you. PC coding. Sorry, my brain, when you said PC, I thought PC Richardson.
POC, like POC coding or black coding.
My brain said PC Richardson. Ignore me, everyone here on the panel and outside. Do. Anyway, so, doing things like that doesn't help, because it's like, yes, we can kind of think of the character being such and such because we don't have anything else there. But if you give us those things, it allows us to feel comfortable, within this genre, instead of feeling like, oh, we're outsiders coming into us, even though, like, even like how Stephanie kind of reiterated, there are things involving fantasy in all cultures, all around the world. Everybody have different skin tones, hair textures, body types, different things like that. And yet it's only seen as something, unfortunately, that is dominated or for people that are not people of color, people who are specifically that are white. So that's just my small TED talk. You guys can go ahead. Shy?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, like, an example of POC coding is like looking at Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z. Like, everyone, or I guess a good chunk of us growing up, often associated Piccolo as someone who would probably be a Black person. It's just or a person of color. And think about where he's from and everything. But back to the topic at hand, representation, it's something that is drastically needed in order for us to increase visibility. We exist. And when you don't show, that there are different ethnicities, different cultures, and different groups, and you only stick to Eurocentric, Western-centric ideals, which is Caucasian, it's white, it's people of lighter hues, and therefore the status quo, it causes a psychological issue of us not being seen. It's invalidating our existence and our experiences. So having us exist in different genres, like we've seen more of us in the horror genre, like Jordan Peele doing, like us doing the whole Get Out, Candyman, like showing us as people of color in different genres is something that is a must. Like, it's not even something where it's like, yeah, we'll sprinkle a support character. We don't necessarily always have to be support. We've always been supporting characters, or we've always been the background character that always seems to be the collateral damage. So when you don't see us in a positive light, or show us that's not, the mercenary, the bum, or whatever it is that they place us in, the possibilities and the ability to see that their possibilities are endless is evident.
Mm-hmm. I think that's like a really great point. I feel that it limits the ideas on that. I feel like I always think of it from the lens of me as a child, or like the formative years, trying to assemble my personality and who I should be. And quite simply, it always comes down to the argument: if you see it, you can believe that you can be those things. And a lot of media does inform the way we view ourselves as a child, and it does go on to reinforce the way we see the world as an adult. And a lot of that belief that because it doesn't exist can really shape someone's like point of view. if we're only seeing ourselves as supporting characters and we don't see other people stepping into roles, then we might not see a path that is visible for us to become those things. Not that I know that I can become a mermaid, but it would be nice to know that someone like me, if a fantasy world existed, could be a mermaid. I think I watched this one documentary on Netflix, I think Women in Film, where a actress did a study to find out how film and cartoons affect um, young women, if there are enough various different um, roles within those shows and cartoons for young women to have opportunities to be visible, to have longer speaking parts, or have different roles. And although Hollywood believed that they were creating more shows and cartoons and movies for women, they were still not as in variety or different kinds of roles for women thus far. And she had done studies finding out that in cartoons and movies, women don't have as many speaking parts as a male. Most conversations women have in a movie are about a male, and or just to kind of inform that the idea that if we don't have more exposure, like what Cheyenne said, then we can't really see ourselves concretely being able to do those things. Not that, fantasy is also the opportunity to create something you don't see. So I feel like that's an argument with an argument. Like, we should be able to create more roles for people. If fantasy is limitless, why can't it be only limited to a certain kind of people? Because you're right, like what Naja was mentioning, Eurocentric fairy tales for sure seem to be more mainstream and well known than other sorts of folklore. You do have to do a little more digging to find out traditional folklore from other places. But even to the concept of the zombie, I had found out that it comes from the African word zambe, and I think it comes from Haiti. So just knowing that things do originate from a non-Eurocentric view, shouldn't we like give our roses and pay reference and homage to the origins of a lot of the things we know? That's my small TED talk.
No, you guys both made some really great points, and even I'm looking at our comment section. We actually have one from Twitch, from Emosaurus, who said, "Did anyone watch Carnival Row?" And yes, I did. Do you want to go first, Stephanie?
Oh no, you can go first.
Okay. 'Cause you look so excited. You had to be like,
Like, I did
yeah.
watch
So
it.
I did watch Carnival Row. I did not finish watching Carnival Row. I need to. I just finished graduating like in May, so I really did not have time to really treat myself. But I did watch Carnival Row, and for all those who do have not watched Carnival Row, I watched it on Amazon Prime. It's actually really good. I like the way that they portray the different characters involving fantasy as both making innuendos to how they're treated as less than because they're not humans, but also the way that they did have, in my opinion, pretty good representation of having people of color in those fantasy roles, right? With the different ways that they had for the fairies and the sprites and like the different other, creatures, with having sorry, why is someone calling me? Or having having different skin tones, but having the same features that you would consider underneath that category for that, magical creature. So for me, that was something I really liked. So thank you for bringing that up, Service, because it's actually a pretty good show. So Stephanie, go.
Yes, that is a really great show, and I think that's a great show to reference in terms of like people of color and fantasy, because one of the central characters is of a darker skin tone, affluent and wealthy, finding himself in a society of wealthy, mundane people, or those who are human, and he has to navigate not only being of darker skin, but also a fantastical creature, which they don't, like you said, and they are treated less than and even segregated to another side of town. So I feel like that's a really great show to reference. I almost forgot about Carnival Row because I'm wondering about season 2. Because there's no word yet, but hopefully there will be a season 2. But I think it's important to see someone in the realm of fantasy and be of a darker skin tone and be wealthy, all those things in a show like that. So that is a really great show to reference.
Yeah. Do you have any? Have you watched it, Shy?
It's a good show. I got
Is
at one point, but I do
oh,
like
you're
it.
muted.
So I heard of it, but I've never had the opportunity to watch it. It's on my list of things to watch, and literally I'm going down my list right now as we speak. So Carnival Row is definitely on my list. I don't remember where on the list, but it's not like on the bottom. It's one of those like reminder, watch Carnival Row. Reminder, watch Penny Dreadful. Reminder, watch Hunter x Hunter. So I'm watching, like I'm starting to sit down and watch like these series that have been recommended. But I've heard Carnival Row was good from those who've recommended it, and just hearing you two talk about it makes me want to watch it even more.
Yes, and this is not a paid sponsorship by the show. However, if the show wants to pay us, thank you. But yeah, thank you so much, Emosaurus, for pulling it up, because that is I totally forgot to mention that show, because it does have great representation in many different ways, right? Because and the thing is, it's multifaceted, right? Because and kind of going back to the previous thing involving representation, right? Don't just have it where you're bringing a person of color that is racially ambiguous all the time, right?
Mhm.
Or they're considered to be white passing, right? Or white accepted, because that's what term I use. I made it up, like white accepted, and you don't find out till later on that they actually are, they are a person of color. They might be, Latinx. They might be Asian or different things like that. And you don't know because we're basing it obviously after the first experience, which isn't always the best thing. All at the same time, too, right? That doesn't help us either. Because if you still have it where people who are of medium or dark complexions are still hosted as the evil person, insignificant, not really important to the story, or not there at all, it's kind of like you're trying to throw us a bone. But the thing is, I need more than a bone. I need meat on it, right? So again, very much so advocate to watch Carnival Row. It's really good show. And speaking of which, going into a little bit more of how people of color are trying to brand and make their own things to help us with different types of representation. The next question actually is, what are your thoughts on days like Black Fae Day or BIPOC Vampire Day?
I love it.
Who wants to, you want to go ahead, Shay? You go ahead.
I love it. Like I get excited. I got excited finding out that Black Fae Day existed. So for me, I was just like, that's a thing. On a second. Yeah. So like for me, it was just kind of like there's a day for us to do things. And it's strictly for us, not just where you're kind of thinking about an overall just where for other people it's like an everyday thing. For us it's kind of like a set day or a set month, and yeah, I didn't know it existed.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know it existed either. I think it's really cool to have days like that, so that it goes to show that many people do feel like there should be a community to foster the idea of us being represented in fantasy genres. And a bunch of us really enjoy it, and that maybe mainstream media doesn't realize they have they have an audience that would love to participate, and they're making their own ways to participate.
Yeah, no, you guys were for me, I'm also team love it. When hearing about Black Fae Day, which for me was not until this year, and I think it was something that was made this year. And I think that really had to do with, again, feeling underrepresented. And I think a lot of times what winds up happening is when people of color, specifically for Black Fae Day, Black people feel like we are underrepresented enough times that we tell you, hey, could you please include us in this thing? Because, we kind of exist. And it's like, yeah, we will. Or, no, you guys aren't that important. We're like, then fine, bet. We're going to do it ourselves. All at the same time, too, with things like Black Fae Day or BIPOC Vampire Day, it gets a lot of heat from people who think that we are trying to exclude people because of the fact that we're specifically saying Black Fae Day or BIPOC Vampire Day. And it's like, well, you guys already have your own stuff, right? You guys already have when people think of a fairy or people think of an elf or people think of or like, a dwarf or anything like that, most times, 9 times out of 10, they are not thinking of multiple options, right? A person of color is not coming up to the forefront of their mind, right? So you guys already have a space that is normalized for you to be within this genre. We are just attempting to celebrate ourselves and being magical, right? Because and also within, like, specifically I talk about within the Black community, there's like, oh, well, this is something that white people do, right? As opposed to being like, no, this is something that anybody can do. But the reason why, my opinion anyway, that it is seen as being something that white people do is because we are not invited to the table. We are not seen as being important enough to be invited to the table. So therefore, it just seems like it's a white people only members club. So when we do try to do things, it's like, oh, well, why are you doing that? If that's not something you're quote unquote supposed to do. So for me, having things like Black Fae Day, and even some people said, like, oh, I miss Black Fae Day, let's make it Black Fae May, because it's actually May 8th, every year. That is really encouraging, right? It helps people with their creative process. There's a lot of people who are also cosplayers who got involved with Black Fae Day because they wanted to make their own original characters. They wanted to do these different types of things, but there is a lot of fear and a lot of fear of criticism that comes behind that. Same thing with BIPOC Vampire Day. Vampires are so infantilized, so romanticized, right? But it's usually nobody that looks like any of us here, right? Or any of the audience members that may be watching this. So us having something that celebrates us within this genre, within this character that is already romanticized, is kind of the concept of like, yeah, we can, not to say that we want to be romanticized in like a sexual way or anything like that, but it's like, hey, we can be like a romantic character. We can be that alluring type of character that is often thought about as being a vampire, different things like that. So that's my, again, secondary TED Talk, in regards to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's to that point is that the idea of what makes a person of color tick somehow to the outside world are not these things. Is that the idea that the things we enjoy are limited to the stereotypes of what people think people of color are. And the fact that I think it goes back to when you watch like teen dramas, like we are so pigeonholed as to what our interests are that I don't think many people realize that we do participate in various different things and have our own various different interests because we're individuals, and there's more than one way to be an individual within a group of people. I feel like it's the stereotype that we're more urban than geeky, but that we can't be both, and that there's just one way to view us. You know, I think that's where it comes down to. It's like, it's almost like a mystery. What is a person of color like? Well, they like hip hop or this, that, and the other. It's like we can like those things, but we can have other interests too. That's where I come from in terms of like this topic.
Yeah, no, actually, to add on to that, right, is like, just to re-emphasize, because it's so important to me. I feel like it's so important to emphasize the fact that one person is not going to be this cookie cutter stereotype, right? Like, I am a combination of many different things. Okay, like I'm Black, I'm Muslim, I'm a woman, I'm an artist, I'm I'm into therapy, but I also like to do video games, and I like fantasy, and I like to cosplay, and I do like I like anime, and like all those things should not take away or remove my Blackness, right? Or remove myself as a person of color just because those are things that I am interested in and I'm engaging in. And I think having the conversation about people of color in fantasy is important, especially as we have people like you said, Jordan Peele, like that Cheyenne mentioned, that are trying to get into places like horror, because again, that's also a genre specifically that we are not in or seen to be, important in. And it's like, well, yeah, technically we've been in these places all along. It's just that now everybody's noticing because internet and TikTok. But do you want to say anything on this show before I move to the next question? You're like, you guys have said everything I wanted to say. So the next question actually is, because Cheyenne actually mentioned it, which is, do you have a list of shows or movies that you would recommend or that you want to watch? I'm waiting, my thing's loading slow to prove up the question, but anyone can answer.
I personally like the reboot of Charmed from the perspective of fantasy and witchcraft originating from Afro-Latinx perspective, because I identify as Afro-Latinx, and one of the charmed sisters is, I believe, half Dominican, like me. She has curly hair, she's of a darker skin and complexion, and I love to see that because I love to see people like me. So I recommend the reboot of Charmed. Carnival Row is already mentioned, but now it's on the top of my brain and I can't think of anything else because I'm thinking of Carnival Row, but I recommend Carnival Row. There's also going to be Dune coming out in the theaters or streaming soon-ish, and Zendaya is in it, and I feel like it's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi-esque fantasy movie. Oh. I think there's also, it's on HBO Max, Lovecraft.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is
Yes. Actually, I'm gonna piggyback off of you guys. I know you mentioned. So, like, I did really enjoy, and this is just me as an personal individual. I did really enjoy Lovecraft Country on HBO. Certain things for me, and that's just me as an individual. I may be seen as like a little kid because I don't like watching sex scenes, but like ignoring that because that's not the whole content. I actually did really enjoy the way that they flipped back and forth, not only with going back in time and seeing the perspective of Black people during that time frame, but also the combination of the fact that fantasy can happen at any time. It's not necessarily be modern or futuristic or like super duper old, like 19th, 18, 16, 17th century, vampiric timeline type of thing. So the fact that they kind of brought it within like the mid 1900s was really cool because it was a combination of the fact that, and this is not telling the whole story, but like just a little bit for those who don't know Lovecraft Country, talking about the experiences of like a Black man and like the Black family during freaking segregation, and the idea of him being literally related to witches, and those witches are all white. And the only reason why he's related to them is due to certain circumstances that probably some of you guys can figure out on your own if you know history, right? So, having this be a show where it talks about both what would be going on in that time in particular, but also combining that with that fantasy component of, oh, wow, this is a Black man trying to struggle with both living during this time period, but also battling different magical creatures and beasts and trying to identify with himself that he's actually a freaking witch, is pretty cool because it gives a realistic, as real as fantasy can be, but a realistic perception and thought process that goes with the fact that, whoa, I'm a witch, what the heck, whoa, ghosts exist, whoa, this happens. And the idea of also too, because we're all mental health people here, just FYI for our audience members, talking about the concept of how much that really can mess with a person's mental health and just being able to process everything and handle stuff. So for me, I do recommend Lovecraft Country, but if anyone is like me who does not enjoy watching sex scenes or different things like that, just giving you a fair warning that does exist. I'm that person that just fast forwards like that. But that is one. Carnival Row is already mentioned. I actually have Voltron. One of the people who's on actually mentioned Voltron, which is on Netflix. Thank you, Toby. I do want to watch it because it looks very, very interesting. Another one that now I can't remember what it's called. Gosh dang it.
Too. Doctor Who is also good.
Yes, I've never watched Doctor Who. That's also on my list, but it's literally long, so I have to start from.
It is really long.
Shai, do you have one? Well, I'm trying to figure out what else I had because my brain's blanking.
So, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Love, Death, and Robots, Witcher, Castlevania.
I'm sorry, I really love Castlevania. It's so fun.
Yeah, so those are some of the ones that I had either started watching, have watched, or have completed or have like fully watched in its entirety. Love, Death, and Robots is like futuristic fantasy, and it's different stories. So it's just basically it's a set concept within like in the future, but the stories that they tell behind each and every episode is as equally interesting, if not has underlying themes that kind of makes it almost creepy at times, depending on what episode you're talking about. Witcher is a great series. The game is great as well, and so are the books. So I would recommend it. They recently came out with an animated movie for Witcher, which is like a prequel. My sister watched it, and my not just friend Sebastian watched it, and they both said it was pretty good.
You
I
just
haven't watched it.
Oh, see, thank you. You said it because I was like, I could not remember for the life of me, and it was Witcher. Because for me, Witcher was actually really, really good. Slightly because of the fact that I like the way the main character looks. But outside of
Be
that,
honest.
no. But literally outside of that, I do like it because again, it's coming from the concept that fantasy isn't just some like magical off-bound thing that is completely outside of ourselves. It's putting in that quote unquote human quality where it's like, oh wow, if I was in this world, I'd be totally wrecked if this thing happened, or I would know how to cope if that, thing happened. Because I do see a lot more of that type of content coming out within fantasy, as opposed to being like, oh, they saved the day, or oh, hey, they did this, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're having no existential crisis. They're not freaking out that they just found out that they're like half a demon or something like that. They're actually showing now in a lot more recent content that, oh, it makes sense for someone to flip the heck out if they all of a sudden started seeing like these different types of things, or oh, it makes sense to like wig out on their parents for not telling them that they're actually like guardians of the galaxy, haha. But I'm corny, I'm sorry. It makes it for me personally more enjoyable because I'm like, yeah, I would feel like that too, or oh man, that makes sense, as opposed to being like, oh wow, this is so, even though fantasy in the context of quote unquote reality is not real, having it seem as though that I can touch it through experiences that are similar to mine, whether it's like real experiences or just the experience of losing someone, the experience of falling in love, the experience of building a friendship, the experience of, trying your best and like, things not working out, stuff like that, right? Oh, she went black. It makes me think of like those movie credits. Meanwhile, this is happening. You know, all of those things are it really just intrigues me and captivates me into the story. Oh wow, she's back like a magician. uh but next question that we actually have is and this one's a funny one, which is any favorite characters.
Favorite characters.
Yeah, any favorite characters, so you could pick more than one.
Geralt from Witcher, I enjoy. I just like how complex his character is. Especially when they do like the past, like the flashback sequences, and like his, and then looking at his strengths and his abilities. Like I want to look at the prequel because this is also based off of his teacher, so you kind of get to know him indirectly through having someone who taught him, basically. Another one is Legolas from Lord of the Rings. Legolas is Orlando Bloom's character, and I've always had a crush on this character, and I knew from back then I liked elves because of him. But just his ability, wisdom, his agility, and his abilities, just his ability to fight was always amazing. So for me, it's definitely those two.
Awesome possum. So for me, I don't know if anyone knows, it's an Australian show. It's called H2O. But
I know it. I know it.
so because going back to my initial thing about me loving mermaids and stuff like that, for me, I don't know why, but I like the characters that are always like a biatch. For what reason, I don't know. It could be because in reality, like I'm not that person, nor do I like being that person. But for some reason, I like those characters because I'm like, man, imagine if I was like that. That'd be scary. Um,
They also have hearts of gold. I feel like those characters are always like on the inside very much like
yeah,
just softies.
they're softies, but they're like, no, I'm gonna be hardcore on the outside and like not care. And then later on, like, why did I do that? Like, I don't know. I like the characters that like do those types of things. So for me, it would be like I forgot her name, but she was the brunette. In the show H2O, they were like mermaids in Australia, and I also too I just love the Australian accent that I hear. So for me, that's also just another, I guess, bias that I have. Um, Funny enough, I also really like Ron Weasley. Like something about him. Don't know why, couldn't give you an actual answer, but really, really enjoy Ron Weasley because in my mind I was just like, there's something more to you. And I know there's something more to you, to which obviously we found out later on. Sometimes he got on my nerves, but I don't know. It was just like the fact that he was just like always trailing behind Harry and just like being such a good friend and all those different types of things. Also too, I'm including favorite characters as being like creatures and stuff like that too. So I got reminded yesterday that there's these things called snifflers from Fantastical Beasts. I'm probably saying it wrong, but like they can sniff out gold. Like I want to sniff out gold. I would wholeheartedly have be a sniffler. I would if I could transform myself into a sniffler, I would, because that would save me all from my student loan debt. If I could
Yes.
if I could sniff out some gold, I would wholeheartedly be a sniffler. There we go. It's hitting me, the tiredness, but yeah, that would be like my favorite characters. Would just be like those two, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing like a lot of them involving like I would say in the sense of like anime because there's a lot of fantasy type of anime. I would be a witch from the anime called Konosuba. I can't remember her name right now, but every time she does her spell, she doesn't like doing small spells. She just do like this giant, like extraordinary, just big kaboom thing. And every time she uses her powers, she just passes the heck out. And I feel like she just embodies me as a person.
Mood.
That she just does all of this work to do this one big move because she refuses to do small stuff, and then after she does it, she passes out and just can't move, and she has to be like carried places. So like I feel like she embodies like that character in Konosuba embodies me because one, I want to be magical, but also two, like I do too much and I like pass out. So so I feel like she's like a giant representation of like myself. But it's going towards the last question that we have here so we can wrap up, which is are there cures or remedies to increase visibility of people of color in the fantasy genre?
I was gonna say, could I quickly answer the last question?
Oh my god, I'm sorry, I missed you.
It's okay.
Oh no.
No.
Ignore that, everyone from who's watching this live. That never happened.
Okay.
We're actually continuing right where I left off.
Sorry. I was gonna say two parts, like in terms of like books that you recommend that are also of the fantasy genre. Children of Blood and Bone is really great. It's fantasy from the perspective of like witchcraft and lore from Africa. It's really great. It's like a young adult book, so it's paranormal romance also, which I'm a fan of. I recommend it. But also, favorite characters. I feel like I forgot to mention Game of Thrones in terms of fantasy.
Me too.
God, love that show. And I love Missandei, obviously. And I really love Brienne of Tarth. I feel like if I'm anyone, I would be Brienne of Tarth. She's everything to me. Loyal, hardworking, wants to be recognized for her hard work and her merit, not for anything else. And Katara from Avatar, because I like waterbending powers. Yeah. Sailor Moon,
Nice.
always, too.
I was about to say, I was like, no Sailor Moon.
I had to say it. I had to. Sailor Pluto also, because, yes, I can't help it.
No, but you just and see those things. Fantasy involves so much, right? It can intervolve with like cartoons, anime, live action, different things like that, movies, books. And now, and you just reminded me. I don't know how I forgot about Game of Thrones because I was like a big Game of Thrones fan, and like I like fell off the face of the earth remembering that. But like my favorite character, top spot, is always Miss Sunday because she again had actual character to her. Though I wish she was there longer
Yeah.
because those who've seen it know what happens. But well, it's kind of wild from now. Like I don't know if this is like a spoiler or not, but whatever. Like I just didn't like the fact that she is no longer existing in the way I would want her to be. And another one, well, I don't know, I'm forgetting her name, but she basically, I think she was like Bear Island or something like that. She was like the young girl who was like in charge of, like, I want to be like her because she was just out and about, just stabbing people up, like
Oh, I know who you're talking
nobody's
about.
business. And I'm forgetting her name, and that might revoke my fan title for Game of Thrones. But like just the amount of hard work that goes into what she had to do and the training she had to do and just the mental breaking that she had to go through was just a lot. And then another one from an anime, which is from an anime called Pretty Pretty Cure. They're also magical girls, to which I love very, very much, as well as sorry, I'm laughing at myself way too much. So also Tokyo Mew Mew. Love Tokyo Mew Mew. Don't like the main character. Love the girl in purple. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. But for her, they're my favorite character. But now to properly segue into the last question, because we'll only have a little bit more time, which is, are there any cures or remedies to increase visibility of people of color in the fantasy genre? Who would like to take this first? All right, Shy.
So, first of all, more people of color creatives. That includes directors, writers, producers, artists, cosplayers. It's like the list goes on. Is include like basically, if we can't be part of the table, to make the table, to basically bring our own table and do the work because it's not going to get done. And if it does get done, it won't get done properly. So that is one of the remedies, is to have more of an inclusive industry, which easy said than done. So yeah.
I agree. I think I think that's the best way to kind of be a voice, is to create your own voice and be a part of the discussion, such as what we're having right now. Is exactly what Cheyenne said. If we're not included in someone else's table, to make our own, because one voice can be amplified by many too, and like it's clearly important to so many of us. So, and all of us can do our own due diligence to kind of just be a part of the world we want to see ourselves in. And I think, to be encouraging of people who do make their own cartoons and or animation or drawings or clothing or films, to push those people forward too, because they work very hard, and they're the real heroes also, just kind of pushing their point of view and perspective into these spaces. I agree.
Nice. So I don't know if I have anything else to say. Y'all said everything. But I guess like just to like reiterate, like having people who you having it seem as though that it is not just one-sided, right? And that there isn't just one perspective to everything. Because I think is just the biggest issue that people of color do have when it comes to any genre, not even just fantasy, just any form of media, is when it seems as though, oh, hey, if we bring in a Black person or an Asian person or a Latinx person or, an Indian person, whoever the case may be, and we'll make them the most stereotype of the stereotype of the stereotype there can possibly be, as opposed to just making them like a literal real person. Not saying that there aren't people that do quote unquote fall underneath those stereotypes and that is truly them, but to have the assumption that all of us coming from there are all like that, and we're all do this, and we all talk like that, and we all like this, and just like this blanket, viewpoint does not help. And to reiterate what, Cheyenne and Stephanie was saying, bring us to the table, or else we're making our own freaking table. And then when we don't invite you because you wilding out, don't be upset. Don't be upset. And that's my decision. Don't be upset if we make our own thing after trying and trying and trying to be involved, and we make our own stuff. And don't be upset when you tell us to make our own things and we do. Don't be upset and don't be surprised if that does happen, right? And we are a little bit more cautious about interacting with other, with people who aren't people of color, who are your certain, who are white, when it comes to that content, because of how hard we've had to probably work to put that together, to make that a thing. Because there is that fear as well of it being like watered down or turned into something that it was never intended to be, because of that interaction, because of that trust that may have been given with you either seeing, viewing, being involved with that content that we worked hard to create. So I think a part of that remedy is that for the content that is already out there, because there are people who make, same thing with like Black comic book artist creators, Black anime creators, right? Black action film, producers, right? We have the thing that remedies those things is showing how important our dollar is, right? Because a lot of times they don't make content because they think our dollar is not important enough, right? They think that our dollar doesn't mean anything. It's not significant enough to be done, right? That's what happened. A lot of people came to a realization with something like, Black Panther, right? It does have a futuristic fantasy type of quality to it, right? And it involves all Black people, right? Most of the people that put this whole thing together, the freaking producer, everybody were Black. The people who were characters in the movie were Black, right? And people saw, wow, people will come out of the woodworks to watch this stuff because of how important representation is, how important it is for us to see ourselves in that. So it's just not only us making the table and putting stuff on the table, but making sure that people know that they can eat off of the table, right? That we can not only make it, right? We can put stuff on it, but realize, hey, once I put something on here, someone will take it off and utilize it. That is going to benefit them and give them that nourishment that they need. So in all, it makes me go out of breath just now with my super passionate.
Breathe.
Whew, okay. Anyway, thank you guys, so much. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Cheyenne, for coming aboard. Thank you so much to our lovely audience and the people that engaged with us for this panel. The next thing that's going to be coming up is our virtual cosplay contest. It is going to be starting roughly a little bit more around 5:25, 5:30. Things are ending slightly later than we intended, but we really wanted to, make sure that all of our panels gave you as much content as possible and not cut it off short just because we were slightly over time. So all in all, thank you guys so much for everything. And we make sure you guys check out our vendors. They are currently on our website at GoSeeCon.com. That you can go straight to their websites or their Instagrams to purchase art, jewelry, henna, different things like that from them. And that's pretty much it. I hope everybody has a good night. Bye.
Thank you.